In the early 1900s in the United States, a movement that had been gaining traction for some time began to reach its pinnacle. Born from the principles of eugenics and selective breeding, the belief was growing that people deemed genetically unfit to reproduce needed to be prevented from doing so for the betterment of the human race. At first, surgical sterilization was touted as the answer to this perceived societal problem. Tens of thousands of Americans were subjected to forced sterilization between 1907 and 1980, but public support was never really strong enough to enact sterilization laws as the standard across the country, so another solution had to be devised. This new solution was to segregate the disabled and lock them away from society for the duration of their lives. And so, as the 20th century dawned in the United States, it brought with it the involuntary institutionalization of disabled individuals on a national scale. The Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic opened in Spring City, Pennsylvania in 1908. It was later renamed Pennhurst State School and Hospital. Pennhurst closed for good in 1987, and the property sat abandoned for 20 years until being purchased by private owners. Today I came here for their daytime history tour. There are other types of tours and events held here too, but I'll get into that later. Pennhurst was fraught with issues for all of its existence, and the abuses that happened here were not unique to this one institution. But a couple of things do make Pennhurst unique. One is the fact that landmark legal cases arose from events here that resulted in significant changes in the way society treated the disabled. Another is the fact that the buildings here still exist at all. It's one of only a handful of institutions of its kind, with buildings still standing. One of our first stops on the tour was the Quaker Building, or Q Building as it was called. This was a residence hall for Pennhurst's more difficult residents, that is, those with more severe disabilities or behavioral issues. Extreme overcrowding was an issue at Pennhurst right from the time it opened. This building was one of the smallest ones here, and for a long time it housed 75 residents on each floor.
This area over here is the day room. If you're familiar with institutions or even places like psychiatric facilities, the day room is usually where a lot of the recreation or relaxation would happen.
Each resident at Pennhurst was assigned to either the custodial or industrial department. The custodial department consisted of patients who had been categorized as untrainable and therefore unable to contribute anything useful to society. Most residents were sent here as children, and those placed in the custodial department suffered the most because they were deprived of any education or social services and basically just warehoused here to be kept until they died.
So this room over here, this is the ward section at Quaker. This is where all the people would pretty much be living, right? This is the dorm section, right? Where you just were was like a recreational room. Then you have some of the offices, PTO team, bathrooms, and so on. This is where you would be pretty much living. All your personal belongings would be in this room, your bed, and all that kind of stuff here.
The industrial department, on the other hand, had the purpose of training residents to be productive members of society. Those placed in this department were taught skills like farming, cooking, sewing, woodworking, housekeeping, and so on. This was the side of Pennhurst that was pictured in promotional pamphlets and publicized as evidence of the institution's success. In fact, part of the legislation that created Pennhurst stated that, quote, "The employment of the inmates in the care and raising of stock and the cultivation of small fruits, vegetables, roots, etc. shall be made tributary, when possible, to the maintenance of the institution," end quote. What this actually meant was that the working inmates made it possible for the institution to operate on a large pool of unpaid workers. This type of unpaid labor, known as peonage, went on at Pennhurst until peonage was outlawed in 1973. And since Pennhurst was woefully understaffed, one of the most common jobs for working residents was actually caring for other less able residents. Everything about this system created an environment rife with abuse and severe neglect perpetrated by both residents and employees. And while of course there were a lot of kind and well-meaning employees at Pennhurst, they were working under conditions that made it impossible to properly care for or protect everyone. There were social events and activities here. There were sports teams, musical groups, outdoor activities and outings, but again, these things were only for a portion of the residents. Pennhurst segregated men and women whenever possible, because preventing procreation always remained the end goal of institutionalization. Everything seen here on the tour was part of the men's campus. In the 1920s, a separate women's campus, known as the Female Colony, was built, but nothing remains of it today. The raised walkways seen here allowed for travel or transport between buildings without the use of stairs, and also served as utility tunnels for pipes and electric wiring. The tour guide told us that this building was where food was stored or prepared, and there used to be another section to it, where the empty fenced-in area is now. Beyond it in the distance, behind the line of trees, is the site where the female colony used to be. The building there now is a veteran center. The use of residents as medical testing subjects was a common practice across institutions and went on for decades. In the 1940s and 50s, residents at Pennhurst were injected with live influenza vaccines and other experimental vaccines, resulting in mercury poisoning and other terrible effects. Medical experimentation on residents was finally ended in Pennsylvania in the 1970s. There were two Pennhursts from the beginning. The legislature created them when they directed that the buildings shall be in two groups, one for the Educational and Industrial Department and one for the Custodial or Asylum Department. While both Pennhursts operated apart from the rest of society, there was some public awareness of the Educational and Industrial Department. In their public reports, the board bragged about their successes in turning profits on the farm, fielding musical groups and baseball teams, and educating those children who were deemed capable of learning. But the reports and the informational booklets published in later years rendered the second Pennhurst, the Custodial or Asylum Department, invisible. That invisibility, fueled by the belief that some people were helpless, without hope of any meaningful life, allowed unfavorable conditions to grow and fester. Conditions that caused a public outcry each time they were exposed in one or another recurring scandals. Tragically, those scandals did not lead to meaningful change because the underlying philosophy did not change. If there was no hope for the individuals in the custodial department to improve, what was the point of trying to improve the place in which they lived? As each scandal waned, the invisible half of Pennhurst slipped away from the public's consciousness, out of sight and out of mind, and little changed. The most well-known of these scandals was the 1968 five-night television expose titled "Suffer the Little Children." Reporter Bill Baldini gained access to film inside Pennhurst, and the horrific conditions that had previously been invisible were broadcast on the local CBS station.
These are some of the sights and sounds of Pennhurst, the state institution for the mentally retarded. It's located in Spring City, Chester County. In 1908, when the institution first opened, the man in charge bitterly complained to the state that the conditions were already overcrowded. He transferred many of the patients to Q1, a classroom building. Many of them are still there. In the 18th century, the mentally retarded were often ignored, punished, and exploited. Today, things are supposed to be different. Modern 20th century man is much more scientific and civilized. Today, we no longer punish the mentally retarded. We don't exploit them either. We have come a long, long way. Now we ship them 25 miles out of town to a state-operated institution and forget them while they decay from neglect. Many of these children have always been without the benefit of parental love or guidance, partly because of the stigma of shame attached to their illness. They have been abandoned and placed at the mercy of the state. In the case of Pennhurst, the state has failed to do its moral duty. During the next 4 evenings, TV 10 will delve into the problems of Pennhurst. We hope to find out why the current conditions exist. What are the problems facing the people running the institution? What has been accomplished in the past? And what must be done to correct the injustices the mentally retarded have endured much, much too long. We entitle our investigative report, "Suffer the Little Children."
Many staffers at Pennhurst welcomed the film crew, eager to have the conditions in the institution exposed. As Baldini later stated, "Now, once we were there shooting this stuff, these people who worked there, these attendants, the management, I would say at least half of that staff was ecstatic, because they knew it was wrong. They just couldn't change the system. So they're feeding me information left and right. Without them, I couldn't have done it. They told me where to go and who to see."
There is not only a shortage of help here at Pennhurst, but also a lack of money and an overextension of professional duties. There are only 9 NDs and 2 psychiatrists working at the institution on a full-time basis. They are responsible for 2,800 sick children, society's children. I also spoke with the business manager here at Pennhurst, Elmer McSurdy. I questioned him on the cost of repairing the buildings.
Can't touch a building unless you're ready to spend $1 million or $1.5 million. Now, as long as the buildings stand the way they are, the law doesn't require that they come in and close it down.
Some of them should be closed down, shouldn't they?
I presume if labor and industry were to inspect them as they stand now with the idea in mind that they must meet their requirements, they would be closed.
Could you tell us a little about the problems you have faced purchasing necessities since Pennhurst has been on its most recent austerity program? Tell us a little about the situation with the braziers.
Well, there was an order for braziers. It was canceled. We were given the opportunity to justify the requisitions.
How did you try to justify it?
On braziers. Well, on that one, I just wrote self-evident.
What happened then?
It came back with a large group of requisitions for more justification.
More justification. Did you justify it further?
I had one of our doctors write a justification.
Did you finally get them?
No.
Tonight we conclude our 5-part special investigative report, Suffer the Little Children. Before we begin tonight's final installment, it is with great regret that I tell you that reporter Bill Baldini, who has worked continuously on the series, has practically collapsed from sheer exhaustion and is unable to read the words which he has written to finish the series. So it is with considerable pride that I conclude this report for him. Tonight we'll show you another view of Pennhurst. This one is from the inside out.
What would you like? If I can give you anything I could in the world, what would you want?
I'd like to get out of Pennhurst.
If you can have anything in the world, what would you want?
But I like to have, but I'll tell you this, well, I have a little bit of money myself, like.
Would you rather have money or would you rather leave Pennhurst?
I'd rather leave Pennhurst.
Even if you didn't have any money?
That's right.
Philip and Calvin have only a slim chance of obtaining their wish in the near future, because only 7% of the children at Pennhurst are enrolled in rehabilitation projects. Why? Because the institution does not have the staff nor the facilities, not to mention money to expand its programs. While these 200 children learn cooperation and development of emotional response, many others rock in silence in their stench-filled, overcrowded cottages. This social indifference stresses the hangover of 19th century philosophy, which condemns the mentally retarded to a bare existence in facilities like Pennhurst.
Why do you think Pennhurst is in the condition it is?
I think Pennhurst is in the condition it's in because nobody cares. The general community either doesn't know or doesn't want to know what the situation is out there. Many of the children are victims of neglect of their own family, and in many instances it's almost understandable because the parents have no choice in the matter. And it must be a dreadful, dreadful feeling for a parent to know that their own child is living under such conditions. People may not even want to say anything about it because they may be afraid of reprisals. But this condition, this horrible, horrible condition at Pennhurst must not be permitted to exist. It is, without a doubt, one of the worst residential facilities in the country. It received a very low rating from the American Association for Mental Deficiency. There is no reason in this day and age, with federal funds available, for such a place to exist. And if you have to lay the blame somewhere, you have to lay it on a number of people. The people that are running it, the state, and the general community, because people must begin to care.
In conclusion, TV10 would like to make certain constructive recommendations. Number one, the state must take the necessary steps to alleviate the overcrowding at Pennhurst. Number two, more physicians are needed. 3, attendance pay should be increased from the present $75 per week to at least $100 per week. 4, a crash program is needed to refurbish old buildings, and new ones should be built to replace the ones that should be condemned. 5, there are 900 women in Pennhurst. However, there is no gynecologist on the full-time staff. 6, there are only 11 teachers employed at the institution, and none of them is certified in special education.
The public response was overwhelming, and the news special was aired nationwide after that. Some improvements were made, but conditions at Pennhurst continued to worsen even after the television expose. In 1972, the newspaper Pottstown Mercury published a piece dubbing Pennhurst the shame of Pennsylvania. Once peonage was outlawed a year later, Pennhurst struggled to function without the free labor of its residents. The residents' quality of life deteriorated further because many of the previously working residents were now given nothing to do at all, and the level of neglect increased. The final blow to Pennhurst came in 1974 in the form of a federal class action lawsuit filed by Terry Lee Halderman and her family after Halderman suffered multiple incidents of abuse at Pennhurst. Halderman v. Pennhurst State School and Hospital was finally settled in 1977, and Pennhurst was ordered to be closed. But in order to ensure that residents weren't simply thrown out with nowhere to go, and to provide time for all residents to be moved to suitable community living situations, the institution remained operational for 10 more years. Pennhurst closed for good in 1987. A 5-year study conducted after Pennhurst closed found that former residents were now better off and happier in basically every way that was measured. The study was then replicated in other states with similar results, which aided in the growing push for disability rights. I mentioned earlier that Pennhurst sat abandoned for 20 years after it closed. During that time, it became a popular urban exploring location and an easy target for vandals, scrappers, and of course, can you guess the next group? Paranormal investigators. This is the administration building, which was the first place someone would go when they were admitted to Pennhurst. This is the building in 2008, and you can see the cupola on top had been damaged. The copper was stripped from it by scrappers who were later arrested. They were found because they made a video of themselves stealing the copper and posted it on YouTube. This building is now also the site of one of the other events held here at Pennhurst, which is a Halloween attraction called Pennhurst Asylum. As disrespectful as this is, it used to be even worse, mixing real events from Pennhurst with made-up stories and characters in a haunted asylum attraction. Apparently they've changed it in recent years to be more of a generic spooky theme, but I still think the whole concept is gross and highly disrespectful of all the very real suffering that happened here. And speaking of gross and disrespectful, let's talk about paranormal investigators.
Try to rationalize it all you want, but you know it's a ghost.
Activity here is freaking nuts.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
It should be pretty clear what I think of this, but just in case it isn't, I'll say it again. This is gross. These people are grifters and clowns. Real people suffered, were horribly abused, and died here, many of them children. And now the site of their suffering is a commercialized paranormal experience where people with no real imaginations can pay a fortune to hang out in a dirty, derelict building at night with flashlights and fake devices while they look at each other and go, "Did you hear that?" Pennhurst should be preserved respectfully as a reminder of a situation that should never be allowed to exist again. The history tour portion seems to be attempting that, but as for the other stuff, The people who were dumped here by society deserve better than to have their suffering monetized for an episode of Douche Adventures.
Up next, NBC 10's Bill Baldini follows up on his landmark investigative reports of some 34 years ago.
He exposed abuses at Pennhurst State Hospital, a story that for some has a very happy ending.
Oh,
I feel like
I feel. This is Pennhurst today, and the big difference between now and then is there's no screaming, no cries for help. Pennhurst closed in November of 1987, and let me tell you something, no one shed any tears. Bill Baldini, NBC 10 News.
We're now entering the second quarter of the 21st century, and things are looking less hopeful than they did at the end of the 20th. The United States has just elected as its leader, for the second time, a convicted felon who has publicly mocked the disabled and has reportedly said of them that we should just let these people die, and who supports a return to forced institutionalization. We're seeing these same types of practices beginning already, with the unlawful arrest and disappearance of anyone arbitrarily deemed to be the wrong type of person. Public support is what created the practice of institutionalization, and public outcry against it is what finally ended it. The same applies now. Humanity has been here before, and what starts as a targeted assault against one marginalized group does not end there. The beliefs and policies that created places like Pennhurst and enabled the rise of Nazi Germany belong in the distant past. We're capable of creating a much better future for all of us.